The subject of the side event today is information management, but I think it's very important also to look at the subtitle, which is Open Data and Innovation. I think it's also the right moment for us to have a side event like this during the Standing Committee. We just concluded, at the end of 2014, UNHCR's 3-year information and data management strategy. And I want to say with a bit of pride in the team that the achievements have been remarkable. At the end of 2011, we had 1 professional staff member in UNHCR with the title Information Management Officer, and she's sitting right there. So she's still with us, but she's been joined by a global network of highly qualified information management specialists in all of the major emergency situations and in almost all of the operations where UNHCR has assumed cluster leadership responsibilities. We also have an ever-expanding and ever-refined toolkit of information management tools to support our work in the field, and also a very, very strong partnership network. And I hope that that's what's represented to you by the team we have before you. There's an old adage that information is power, and in the old sense that meant controlling and compartmentalizing and restricting the flow of information. Today, at least in the humanitarian sector, information is still power, but the power comes through sharing data, open data, through collaboration, and it makes us all more powerful and able to work together more effectively for the people we serve. So this event really is not a showcase for UNHCR to talk to you about all the things that we've done, but rather a showcase for information management, to show you a bit more how we collaborate, what are the underlying concepts, how it works, and how we bring people and technology together to translate data and information into analysis, and then use that analysis to improve the lives of the people we serve and function more effectively with better, smarter programming. With us today are several experts in this field. I'd like to introduce them. To my right, Marion Orchison is the coordinator of the, if I need the English version, get it right, I'm speaking English. The coordinator of the Standby Partnership Training Secretariat for Information. She said yesterday that the biggest demand they're having now in the field is for qualified information management officers, which will speak a bit to how we meet the needs in the field. Also, we have with us Kerren Hedlund, who works with the consulting firm Humanitarian Outcomes. Kerren, for the past year or so, has also been UNHCR's senior advisor on cash-based assistance and the real intellectual force behind all of the work we've been doing in this area. And finally, CJ Hendrix, to my left, is the technical lead, information officer at OCHA, the technical lead for the Humanitarian Exchange Language Initiative, and he'll explain what that means, but I think from the name alone you understand it, it's having a common language so that we can all communicate information and data with each other more effectively. Let me just note that I'm also joined by my colleagues from the Field Information Coordination and Support section who will be doing some of the presentations. Stefan Svarnik, Chemaly Bernal, and of course Kim Roberson, who's taken the position of not being one of the speakers, but she's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain who manages all of the information management initiatives in UNHCR. So without any further ado, because we have a very tightly choreographed program, I would say, I hope we'll get through it and have time for questions at the end. But I think it's important to jump right into the substance. And with that in mind, I would like to give the floor to Marion. Marion?
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, sorry, Stefan. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Dabawalas is a recognized textbook example of efficiency and organization. But instead of using a complex, technology-driven administration system, they have built a giant business on trust, knowledge, and intelligence of families. If we take the example of Mumbai, where more than 200,000 customers are delivered with their hot home-cooked lunch on a daily basis without interruption in a city congested with traffic and impossible weather. This represents more or less 400,000 transactions on a daily basis. A family of over 5,000 Dabawalas, each carrying 40 lunches, and using eco-friendly transport. The system is like 120 years old delivery system, often challenged, but has never been modified so far. It is also suggested that the margin of error is as low as 1 in 6 million lunchboxes not delivered or not on time. So what makes the system so efficient? First, an investment of as little as $100 is enough for the Dabawala to do their job. Most Dabawalas are illiterate, but succeed thanks to an ingenious system using color-coded system to denote delivery and pickup points. Dabawala's success is also based on the fact that each knows of his customer and the people around, building a network and trust among each other. They also hold equal shares, and they always have a backup plan. The humanitarian context is not so different. Equally complex, and many similarities can be drawn between how the Dabawalas and the interagency information management community works together. The humanitarian actors deal with a lot of data, often collected by others. Information management seeks to enforce a common coding system to ensure interoperability and comparison between the different data sets. Partnership and collaboration in information management are key for a common understanding of the needs and an efficient response. Information that is collected on a base of a commonly agreed standard and system has a greater chance of being used rather than being contested. IAM provides services to all partners in terms of guidance, tool, analysis, and means of dissemination. Multiple methodologies and tools are available depending on the objective, the resources available, the context, and issues related to data protection. Only a coordinated and a collaborative approach avoids beneficiary being subjected to multiple assessment over time or falling into information management traps, and therefore maximizing resources collaboratively for a greater coverage, as data is only collected once but shared and used multiple times. Innovation is not always requiring technology. Information management seeks to understand the information needs of the humanitarian actors and adapt the process of gathering, analyzing, and disseminating with a sensible use of technology, not forgetting that reliability and credibility is the result of process, the people, rather than technology.
Thanks very much, Stefan. And this just goes to show that this information management is often mistaken as an IT function or IT activity. You'll see how technology plays out. It's very much a human and coordination exercise. Marion?
Thanks very much. I very much want to echo the focus on the people involved in information management. Standby Partner Training Secretariat is an interagency service that supports the 25 partners who provide technical expertise to 8 UN agencies for emergency response, of which UNHCR is the oldest recipient, taking surge personnel from Standby Partners since 1991. As Steve mentioned at the beginning, information management technical experts have become one of the most highly sought after surge capacity deployees in the system for humanitarian action that the Standby Partnership supports. Year on year, a number of our UN agencies are doubling the number of requests, and for the last 3 years, the single biggest gap that we've identified within that partnership around information management was adequate training and preparation for IAM personnel. Without personnel who understand the role of information management in humanitarian action, the tools that we develop have very little utility. Our focus for the last year and a half has been to work with the Information Management Working Group at the global level to come to a common understanding around what information management is in the humanitarian system, how we can explain that to the people doing the work, and how we can engage with those staff before they get into the field to ensure that when they arrive, they're able to make use of the tools that are available to them, they know where to find them, and they know where to get help. As of 2014, we have what's called the JIMT, the Joint UN Information Management Training, that was developed as a collaborative approach to training information management personnel, to developing a common fundamental understanding of the role of information management in informed decision-making for humanitarian action, and to demonstrate our collective commitment to capacity building of individual staff members beyond an individual agency or individual cluster focus. In that time, we have worked to raise awareness of the importance of information management, not just through training, but by developing the training to demand that we focus on how to explain the tools and how to disseminate them in a way that is usable by a wider audience. And it's given us a common base from which to develop more technical and agency-specific training. We have, in the last 6 months, continued to revise that work and to work with technical experts, many of whom are here today, to ensure that we keep up to date and that we focus on assisting our staff and a community of training practitioners to advance information management training and to ensure that information management remains a key component of broader inter-agency humanitarian training. So also building a connection between coordination and programming to ensure that that fundamental role information management plays is better understood by the wider humanitarian community and it's integrated into the training being undertaken beyond just our technical experts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And, there we go. And as you can see, the coordination is working very well because other than the fact that I didn't read the order correctly, people are sticking to their time frame. I just want to add that within UNHCR, we also have a parallel program for training called the Training on Information Management in Emergencies. This is something akin to the workshop on emergency management for more broadly focused emergency response, and it builds up our internal deployable capacity for information management officers in the field. Let me now pass the floor to Chemaly Bernal, who will tell us something about the tools that UNHCR has developed for information management.
Open data is a relatively recently defined concept. It's the idea that certain types of data should be freely available to everyone to use and republish as they wish, without restrictions from copyright or mechanisms of control. UNHCR, in a way, has been doing this for years with the publication of statistics like the Statistical Yearbook or Asylum Trends. But the demand from the interagency community and our partners was to do this real time in emergencies. This is actually an incredible logistical and technological challenge. How can we get information out fast enough? How can we ensure that systems and statistics are compatible? And how can we ensure that we get it to those who need it? What we did was we established a network of information management officers in key operations around the world and trained them. In order to stop them from reinventing the wheel and starting from zero every time, we developed the Emergency Information Management Toolkit. It's a website that's publicly available to UNHCR staff as well as partners or anyone in the humanitarian community with a carefully selected subset of tools for information management, including data collection, analysis, processing, dissemination, data visualization. And what happens is, the next slide please, you can go to a topic and read a page of guidance and then download the tools that you need, customize them for your operation, and then use them. The topics are broad. They range from population statistics to registration, information management strategy, needs assessments, minimum sectoral data, and camp profiles, etc. Then we update these based on new innovations in the field so that it's always up to date. And what happens as a result of the use of this is that information products are better quality, the data structures are more predictable and more compatible between operations. Instead of using similar tools that aren't the same, that's the danger here, is that we keep developing similar things, but it's not exactly the same, so we maintain different things, we can't combine different things. Everything's a little bit different, then we're using the same thing, and we have more predictable and better quality output. Now the next challenge, of course, was to make sure that these information products get out to people and are disseminated. disseminated. And that's why we've developed the operational web portal. Some of you might have seen this already. It's a very high-profile project where for different refugee emergency situations that are cross-border situations, we have instances of the web portal where we can publish data in real time. As a result of having the web portal, we've gone from publishing paper-based population statistics once a year or once a quarter to publishing population statistics in machine-readable format daily or weekly. So this was a huge achievement in terms of getting the information out to the partners. The web portal uses an open model, trying to use non-proprietary formats, and has an interface to transfer the data between sites. For example, Humanitarian Response, Relief Web, and the BBC can get the data instantly. It's structured according to geography. That's its backbone. So we have different instances for different situations, and you can look at a macro level. So you can go and look at what's the situation for the Syrian refugee crisis right now, or you can drill down to a country such as Jordan, or down to a specific camp, and just look at the statistics in the documents pertaining to that single camp. So the database can aggregate up and down according to geography. Next slide, please. Then the things that it has are who does what where information, needs assessments, population statistics, a document repository. There's also partner pages for indicating partner activity, contact information, etc. And the features are ever expanding. The population statistics and the geographical information is available in a raw data format that can go out to anyone. And then the next slide, please. Next one. It's been quite successful with over 100,000 page views a month. There have been over 10,000 documents uploaded. And there's more than 17,000 population records, which is and that's something I'd really like to highlight in terms of providing displacement data to humanitarian community.
What's the population record?
A population record is the number of people, hopefully disaggregated by age and sex, in a particular place at a particular time.
My fears about the time are unfounded. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, so I want to appreciate everybody who's spoken so far. I think now you understand the trajectory of the presentation. We started out with a conceptual understanding of information management, divorced from technology. We talked about the people who do information management and how important collaboration is. We've had a bit on the tools that are available to do information management, and now we're going to take the leap from data to information and analysis and action and programming. And for that, I'd like to give the floor to Kerren Hedlund, who's worked with us very closely on vulnerability assessment and targeting in this serious situation. Thanks, Kerren.
Thank you to the other panelists and to Steve. My name is Kerren Hedlund, and I have been fortunate enough to backstop an exercise in data crunching using open data in the Syria crisis. And I'm going to speak about Jordan, but these parallel exercises are happening in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Egypt. And it's basically an example of how, when this data is shared, it can be used to improve programming for persons of concern, to UNHCR, or just humanitarian programming in general. So I'm going to use the practical example of using the information for targeting. Now, I don't think I probably need to tell you why targeting isn't so important, but in an era, as you probably are well informed, of increasing number of refugees and declining resources, we're having to make difficult choices about who receives largely material assistance. And in this case, I have a map for you that we used last year in our advocacy to try to increase the amount of food assistance available for refugees. We were having to decide between 1 and 2 persons in refugee camps who would receive food assistance and who would not. These are incredibly difficult decisions that people are relying, not least the refugees themselves, on us to get right. The other reality around, in this case, persons of concern in Syria, is that not all refugees are the same. Some cope better with displacement. This is an income curve, and the bars you see on the left side are those who are living below what we're calling a refugee poverty line. But those living on the right side are those who are coping well with displacement, providing material resources to those persons who can afford to buy what they need on markets would be a waste of very valuable resources, particularly when we're having to make other difficult decisions where we send money to Syria crisis or to Africa, which is in line with the previous slide. So how do we do targeting? A lot of us base our targeting decisions on assumptions. Who is vulnerable and who is not? We have a profile in our mind about women with children, women unaccompanied, women alone who may be subject to certain protection violations, but that might also need certain material assistance. We have assumptions about men and their ability to find work and to take care of their families. We have assumptions about people who are homeless and why they are homeless, assuming that they are poor, but in fact, maybe the cause of their homelessness is actually something else, such as mental illness. And the appropriate response to their particular problem is not material assistance, but something else. To make good decisions about who will receive what, we need to use data. And ideally, we use the data that we have at our disposition already. And all of the presentations until now have talked about the accumulation of data. In the case of the Syria crisis, we have billions of records, literally, because of the ongoing data collection efforts, not only through big surveys, such as the vulnerability assessment of Syrian refugees in Lebanon in this case, but also through the meticulous and systematic household interviews that UNHCR undertakes in Jordan, for example, through a network of local NGOs, to understand what is the specific situation of each household in Jordan. We also have the ongoing efforts of NGOs who collect data that might be sector-specific, or that, for example, about their shelter conditions, or about their water and sanitation conditions. All of this information being put into a single database provides a very rich source for analysis, not least for determining who might need what, where, when. So what we did in Jordan was that the World Bank, when they got a kind of peek at the data that was available in Jordan, their eyes popped out of their heads and they said, we can do poverty modeling among the Syrian refugees in Jordan, much like the poverty modeling that we do in development settings. Of course, we have to nuance it. We have to look at what does poverty mean in a refugee context? What does refugee destitution mean in the case of the Syria crisis? Because it will mean different things in different places. So all of these things have to be tested over and over again so that we don't fall back on the assumptions that lead us to make mistakes about the use of our resources. So what they were able to do was, using that data, they found basically 11 indicators out of hundreds of indicators that allowed us to predict refugee destitution. Of those 11 indicators, they found 5 of them, those are some of the indicators that they used, they found that allowed us to predict whether or not a refugee would fall below that earlier curve I showed you, the poverty line, or above the poverty line. And of these 11 indicators, they found 4 that were in progress, which is our, call it refugee database. It's where we hold that valuable information about refugees. We have that data for every single registered refugee. And in a crisis of over 1 million refugees, where it is going to be impossible for us to visit each one by one, that information which we have can lead us to make wise decisions right at the beginning of an emergency, when we have to make a decision about where to prioritize our assistance. Of course, then there is a reiterative process where we validate if we've made the right decisions based on data that we've had without actually having visited the household. So it sets in process a collaborative process between NGOs, refugee communities themselves, host communities, host governments, and the UN organizations to have a better understanding of the living conditions, the well-being of persons of concern. Finally, what it allows us to do is then geographically map and actually identify, if we have their addresses, of those persons who should be receiving, in this case, cash assistance. It also allows us to predict the potential impact of our cash assistance. looking at how we can reduce refugee destitution over time. Now we're doing further studies with the World Bank in Jordan, Lebanon, and in Egypt to have a better understanding, a profile of what is refugee destitution in the case of the Syria crisis. How does it compare to a similar study or similar analysis of Lebanese poverty or Jordanian poverty? So we can use this information as an advocacy to ease the way for refugees in these countries, particularly access to work, where they can, by their own bootstraps, pull themselves out of poverty and benefit also the local economies. I think I'll wrap it up with that, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerren. You know, one of the challenges we face in UNHCR is we have a lot of data, but we don't have the analytical capacity to do everything that's possible with that data. That's why we think open data is quite important. And I think the Jordan example and our collaboration with the World Bank shows the value not only of sharing data, but also of reaching out to those organizations that have the power and the expertise to teach us lessons with the information that's already in our possession. Chemaly, can I give the floor to you to have just a short intervention on the PSR?
Okay. I have a confession to make. Prior to recently, UNHCR managed population statistics globally through thousands of Excel spreadsheets. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? But you know what? I think a lot of governments, we would probably find similar nooks and crannies of statistics in other governments too. The problem with that approach is that it's unsustainable. Version control becomes a problem. We can use historical data, and sharing that data in terms of open data, what we've been talking about today, becomes very difficult. Because if I send you a spreadsheet with thousands of rows on it, that's harder to digest than you being able to query a database and just pull the only. As a result of that, and that problem, it was a very complex it's more complex than it looks, but we centralized a database called the Population Statistics Reference Database. And what happens is field personnel enter their annual statistical reports, which is the population data for all operations worldwide of every single refugee that we have, into that database so that it can be cleaned and consolidated at headquarters, and then shared with other organizations such as OCHA, the World Bank, or others who are interested in this data. The database itself is capable of outputting to a computer language called HXL, which CJ is going to talk about in a moment. HXL is an important exchange language for humanitarian data because it doesn't care about what system, what database you're using. It can go between any type of database. A few years ago, our solutions for sharing humanitarian data were to build a giant database in the sky that all the agencies were going to use. So we all have to give up our own databases and use this big database. And the problem with that negotiation is that everyone is enthusiastic about it because it will simplify all these problems of collaboration and data sharing. However, everyone wants the database in the sky to be their database. And our databases have some reasons for being different. We have different mandates. We have different populations of concern. There are reasons for why our databases are different. So having a single database for all agencies isn't a realistic solution for data sharing. Now, along comes HXL. And what HXL does is it allows us to take information from one, for example, proprietary database, output it into a stream of information that can be machine read without human intervention into another database. So there's no more data entry in between, manual data entry in between databases. We can just send it as a stream. So the efficiency is there, and also that goal of getting to real-time information sharing becomes closer. But CJ Hendrix from OCHA is responsible for this project which we like to call the Durable Solution for Humanitarian Information Sharing, and he will explain the details for you.
Thank you, I'd just let you, we'll jump right into it then. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly in keeping with the time, so hang on. So I want to talk to you about the Humanitarian Exchange language. We call it HEXL for short, HXL, HEXL. And it's a project of OCHA. It's actually a part of the HDX project, which is the Humanitarian Data Exchange. That's actually a web platform for sharing data. The problem has always been how do we get data onto that platform in a way that we can read it and do things with it, like make graphs and maps and so on. And so HEXL, as a sort of sub-project of HDX, is a way of sort of greasing those wheels. I'm going to share with you a little bit about exactly what the problem is that HEXL tries to solve, and very little bit about how it works, because it's really dead simple. Next slide, please. So, Chemaly made her confession, and I'll make one on behalf of the whole humanitarian community here, which is that 90% or more of operational data in humanitarian crisis exists on spreadsheets. Typically pretty small ones, little NGOs tracking what they do. An organization goes out and does a survey. There's a few big databases in the game. National militaries often have that. Big agencies often have databases, but the real core of where the needs are and where the response is on spreadsheets. And the problem with that is that these data, they're difficult to find because they're out there on these spreadsheets on people's laptops in the middle of the crisis. Because they're hard to find, they're often duplicated. I may need a certain kind of data compiled, and I don't know that someone else has made something very similar already. Because I can't find it, I'll spend time basically recreating it or creating something very similar. It's difficult to use, even if you do find it. You may not know what the headers, the column headers mean, the field names mean. It can be a bit cryptic. You may not have good documentation of what the methodology for compiling it is. So the data can be very difficult to use if you do find it. And because of all that difficulty of compiling and pulling data together, it's often compiled too late to inform real-time decision making. I don't think there's any research behind this, but it's sort of the accepted numbers that to create a graph or a map or some kind of decision support material in a humanitarian operation, something between 60 and 80% of the effort goes into compiling and cleaning the data. I don't know if my information management colleagues will back me up on that number, but that's a huge amount of effort, and it slows things down. It means that the materials that decision makers need, all the way from people in logisticians in the field up to people in donor capitals, looking at trying to make decisions about what to do. That information, that data is compiled often too late to be maximally useful. Next slide. And of course, information managers in the field are often overworked, but who isn't? They're overwhelmed by existing reporting requirements. This is the quote reporting burden, which we hear about a lot. Adding a new reporting burden is a bad idea right from the get-go. And they're dealing with connectivity problems and information management skill limitations, which we've already heard a bit about already. The connectivity can get a little better each year, but it's still remarkably bad in a lot of places where we work. Next slide, please. So how do we fix that problem? Well, what we don't want to do is what's in this cartoon, right? 14 competing standards, that's ridiculous. Let's come up with a new standard that meets everybody's needs, and then what you get in our 15 standards. We don't want to do that. Next slide. So how do we fix that? How does HEXL fix that problem without creating another new standard that isn't used? So if you don't remember anything else I say about HEXL today, please remember this first point. The key thing about HEXL is we don't ask people to change their systems for all the reasons that Chemaly just described. People are committed to their systems. Either it's a big database that the organization has invested time in and meets their needs, they're not going to change that. It would be ridiculous to ask them to. Let's ask the U.S. military to change their databases when they're helping respond in a humanitarian crisis. Right. But even all the way down to just an information manager in the field for a small NGO, he's got his spreadsheet that he's used in 3 different emergencies. He tweaks it a little bit every time he does it. If you ask him to change that in the middle of a big crisis, you're probably not going to meet with much success. Second point, don't ask data providers to duplicate their information into a new system or form. And that's kind of getting at what Chemaly was describing as a big database in the sky, is this one database to rule them all kind of approach. It sounds great, but it essentially means people have to copy paste their data in some way or somehow move it over. It's an extra reporting burden. And the other thing is we tend to request in these requests for sharing data, we tend to ask for everything in the kitchen sink. The impression is you only get to ask once, so you better ask for everything. And that makes it each information sharing request kind of a heavy burden. So we don't do that. Let's only request the stuff that's absolutely essential across the humanitarian community. Next slide, please. And then this is the second point. The first point I really want you to remember is that we don't ask people to change their existing systems. The second point I really want you to remember is if we're going to make this work, there has to be a carrot. If people share data in this hexylated way, if I can invent a verb to hexylate data, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. But if we're going to ask people to share data in that way, they need to get something back, and it needs to be immediate. It needs to not be share your data and then it'll show up in a report in a couple of weeks or even in a week. It needs to be you share your data and the system gives you a map, or it gives you a graph, or it gives you some data validation or duplication searching, and this kind of feedback that makes users want to share their data. That's absolutely essential. So, this is as technical as it's going to get, I promise. And it's very, very easy. This is a spreadsheet, right? Or a CSV. It could even be a database. Your column for cluster, your column for location, in this case province, number targeted, number reach. Very simple example. All Hexel requires, doesn't require to change any of those things. We don't have to change cluster to theme, or we don't have to change province to administrative level 1 or anything like that. They can keep that system totally in place. All that Hexel asks for, next slide, is in the output that they're sharing, to add a new row, second row, and in that row, next slide, put some hashtags. And these are hashtags very much in the sense of hashtags that we see in social media. These are a set of governed and accepted and agreed by, at the moment, an ad hoc working group. They're working on a governance model, long-term governance model for that now. These are hashtags that are agreed and accepted, and their semantic meaning is agreed. So sector is the tag to indicate the thematic area of work, and those definitions are written down. There's a documented standard online. ADM1 is the administrative division 1, the first administrative division of a country, whether it's province or state or region or whatever. That's how we can refer to them. So what this does for us is that those tags are machine readable, and this means that when you share data into a system such as the platform I work on, the Humanitarian Data Exchange, we can immediately do something with it because we know what the columns are. So we can make a pretty good guess based on which columns are present, what you might want to get back out of that map. And so we can immediately do something like the next slide, present you with a map. Now this is not very exciting these days. This is a web-based map. We've all seen lots and lots of these things. But the exciting thing about this is how this map was produced. A user who just had a simple, dumb spreadsheet of activity data for the Somalia NGO consortium uploaded it, and the system immediately gave them back a map. So they got some feedback back. If there's a problem in that data, for example, there are some empty administrative divisions there, maybe there's something's missing from the data, you instantly can see that. So without them having to be a GIS person or a statistician, we can give them graphs and charts and feedback on their data immediately. And that can then be shared, right? They can share that with their compatriots, with their bosses, or whoever. I've got a bunch more slides, but they're much more technical, so I'm going to stop here. So giving people maps and graphs back is really important and useful and exciting, and it's what's the carrot that makes the data exchange really happen. But the real power comes when lots of people are doing this. This data is all tagged, so we know what's in it, and we can begin to aggregate that data in real time. So we go from a common operating picture that's formulated with massive amounts of effort and is delivered weeks too late to be useful, to a common operating picture that can be updated on a daily basis and inform decisions for the next day.
Thanks, CJ, and especially for not making me feel stupid. I was afraid he's got a very technical and complicated job, but he's put it in terms that I think were very digestible. I'd like to say also that this is really an extremely important OCHA role. It's really only OCHA which sits at the center of all of the agencies who can facilitate and coordinate on this issue. And this type of work, which is very technical and, as I said, very complex, is invisible and less glamorous. You only know that this system doesn't work when it doesn't work. When it's working fine, you may not even be aware that so much has gone into making it function effectively in the engine room. It's also a little bit hard to explain as agencies sometimes why we need to invest in these areas, because they're not as evident as perhaps a web portal or something else that you use, but they're nonetheless really important, and ultimately they save resources, people's time, and ensure our effectiveness. Before I open it up for question and answers, first let me thank the panelists also for keeping us quite on time. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of William Chemaly. Those of you who looked at the invitation for this event would note that William was there. He kindly stepped aside because we were concerned about the length of time and wanting to have enough period for question and answer. William is the former coordinator of the Joint IDP Profiling Service. He, in that capacity, appeared before the Standing Committee at different side events. He's most recently been the Geneva representative of the Danish Refugee Council, and he's just left that position and is joining our OCHA colleagues in the Syria situation. But before we open up for Q&A, William, I wonder if you'd like to say a few words.
Very good putting on the spot. Well, I guess the main points that were made by the colleagues are really simple and encourage. And I think what is really interesting in this field is that the UN, NGOs, the Red Cross have spoken for over a decade on real-time collaboration and joint decision-making in one UN. And I think the real breakthrough that is done in the field, on the ground, is through information managers. The easiest collaboration in the field on sharing something and doing something together is basically driven by information managers. For obvious reasons, is that the carrots are quite well defined, and for a clear reason where, from an information manager eye, the need for analysis, data, compilation, cleaning is so massive, and we're, as a sector, so under-resourced that the only way we can actually do an almost proper job is by collaborating. So I would emphasize on the value of attitude that information managers are driving in the field, and try to encourage governments and leadership of UN agencies and NGOs to work with these people beyond the actual product on spreading this attitude or momentum of collaboration, because this is where it's really happening. I'm not saying that's not happening elsewhere, but this is where there is a real breakthrough. So thank you.
Thanks, William. Thanks very much. We actually do have a few minutes for question. I think we should probably break by 5:02 at the latest, so that colleagues can move on to the full session of the Standing Committee. But at this moment, I'd like to open the floor if there are any questions or comments from participants. United States.
Thank you. Apologies for coming in late. Thank you for what I was able to catch in this. This is certainly great news to hear about consolidating and improving provision of data. One question, you alluded to the challenges that information managers face, especially in the field, just speaking to the field more, particularly in the global context right now. No, I don't, sorry. But I'm curious what kind of systems are in place to ensure data consistency and quality, just quality control measures, to make sure that what you're getting on place is consistent and quality of data.
We'll see if there are any other questions first before we continue.
Sure.
Any other questions? I'll give the floor to Kim Roberson, who will speak to the issue of data quality, which is absolutely a challenge. Maybe just if I could just say that a lot of the work that CJ is doing to pull it all together in a central repository will certainly help a lot. We have common standards that facilitate comparability. So Kim, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. There's many different types of data, so therefore there are many different types of quality. And when we talk about data quality as information managers, we have a slightly broader concept. We consider data quality being not only just that traditional quality, but good data is data that you get on time, the things that CJ was talking about. If it comes late, the quality isn't there. That you have some idea about the accuracy of the data, and that you know how accurate it is in relation to the issues that are being assessed. And for that, it's an understanding of the methodologies that were used behind it is really key. And the other is that it's relevant. A lot of data that doesn't answer your questions is not quality data either. So bringing those three things together, the timeliness, the accuracy, and the relevance is really the challenge when you look at So the relevance is a very difficult question. It's a very intellectual challenge in many cases. The absence of quality data, people often respond by just getting more data. And the more data is very expensive and complicated to collect, manage, store, and use. The more data you have, the harder that is, and it's an exponential growth. And Chemaly has done a lot of work in getting people to understand how do you make the right decisions about the type of data, and that's a lot of the training. So we try to develop a philosophy of not starting with the questionnaires when people are doing surveys or analysis or data question, but start with what are they actually looking to find? What do they want the report to look like? So that's a bit of a pushing the thinking up front so we don't have too much data. On methodologies and the accuracy, it's very much a question of adapting the right methodology in the right circumstance. Surveys have statistical orientation behind them. The type of work that Kerren worked in the World Bank in Jordan is based on very strong and very rigorous statistical methods, on sampling frames, and being sure that you adapt the right methodology to your environment. Registration, which is another great way that data is collected, is looking at individual interviews, and the process for the validation of the registration information that UNHCR has and holds is very important because a lot of protection decisions are based on that information. So there are standards, and registration is done through individual interviews. There's nobody in UNHCR's registration database who wasn't seen and interviewed by somebody who works for UNHCR. The data is validated as often as we can. We introduce additional factors. So data quality, there's lots of things when you ask about data quality, and there's lots of different efforts. There are real hard gaps in some of these that we're working on, and protection data is one of the hardest ones due to definitional issues and data sharing and data protection concerns. But we could spend a lot of time on data quality if you have a moment.
Any of the other panelists like to comment on data quality? Sure, Marion.
I think one of the things for us when we were working with all of the UN agencies to come up with the joint training was a lot of how do we train people before they go out to know how to recognize quality data, to know what to ask for, to know how to engage with data in a way that's going to mean that they don't just look for more, they look for better quality. And a lot of what we're doing is trying to help clarify the expectations around that so that our staff are
I think, yeah, and as Kim said, there are different reasons and different levels of quality you have to have. Do you need perfect data in all cases? No, in fact, Kim pointed to the issue of time, but the data needs to be good enough to make the decision that you need to make. So data should not be for it in and of itself, it should be for a specific purpose. There are areas where quality becomes extremely important and maybe a little easier to meet. UNHCR's Health Information System, TWINE, is based upon well-known international standards in public health, yet still when we're implementing TWINE in a new operation, it really is a bottom-up process where the colleagues who are building the system go to meet the reception person at the clinic to make sure that apples are called apples and the oranges are called oranges, that the diagnostic terminology is used in exactly the same way in all of the places, because unless you start at that level and roll it up, then what you get at the end is not comparable or reliable. So the human dimension and training, I think, are extremely important. Any other questions? I think Chemaly had a comment she wanted to make. Are there other questions from the audience first? Yes, Vicky? There you go.
Yeah, online, okay. No, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm Vicky Ten from UNHCR, and I recently came back from managing a field operation in Myanmar, and I just wanted to make a comment about the importance of really locating information management at the heart of the operation and really embedding it in the field strategies, because I think sometimes it can become a sort of a technical kind of standalone function, and we talk a lot about universal standards and common indicators and common methodologies, and I think it really needs to be rooted in reality and rooted in what is possible at the local level. And there are certain contexts in which the very act of gathering information is is it has political implications. It has implications for access. It has implications for the protection of people we work for. And I think all those things need to be kind of built into how we approach information management, so that we get this balance between having good quality data that can be aggregated upwards and used to sort of feed into that high level analysis, but it's also really that's part of the operation. It's owned by the operation and reflects what is actually possible at that level.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions? I think what Vicky said is very important, and really you can think of managing data like a pyramid or even results-based management. It really makes the most sense at the ground level, at the base of the pyramid, where the partners, UNHCR, and the community are talking together and using that information to make real decisions in a practical way on the ground. A subset should gravitate upward to the management level here in Geneva and at the capitals to make better decisions on the strategic level. And then a subset at the very top is what we share externally, which will be interesting for donors and host governments to understand more about programs that we're implementing. If we only focus on the top and feeding the top and the more and more detail and information as to what might be interesting externally, and ignore the fact that we don't have the capacity at the base to feed the pyramid, or that what we're collecting is not really relevant to those who have to spend a lot of time collecting it, the system won't work. Chemaly, did you want to say anything else?
I want to add something to what Vicky said, and then I want to say something else. When we talk about open data, we didn't go into some of the problems with open data for our particular context. And one of them is protection concerns. And we can actually shut down humanitarian space, put humanitarian actors or the population of concern at risk by sharing certain types of data. And so we do have to always look at open data initiatives from a protection perspective first, and not get lost in innovation and needing to produce a product for headquarters or for donors if it's going to mean that people are suffering, especially in the context of yours. One thing I wanted to say about HXL is that HXL looks very ambitious and abstract, but I just wanted to point out that it's modeled after a computer language that the private sector uses as a solution to transferring data between systems, called XML. A lot of the large-scale enterprise e-commerce solutions that you guys use every day use XML to transfer information between servers, and that wouldn't have been possible. That wouldn't have, this scale of e-commerce that we engage in every day, that wouldn't have been possible without that language. So we can, as humanitarians, we can model on the innovations done in the private sector to get there too. So it's not, even though it looks ambitious, it's already, that type of approach has already been demonstrated as successful and is firmly institutionalized in the private sector.
Since we have a little bit of time, I'll just follow on to that comment by saying, there was, HEXL at the moment is an alpha standard, so it's out there for people to comment on and use as they wish. And in the Ebola crisis, there was spontaneous uptake by sort of international group of volunteers who were trying to map health facilities sort of early on in the crisis, or let's say early on when the crisis became, the world became aware of that crisis. A lot of digital volunteers in far-flung places were interested in working together to map health facilities. And they spontaneously took up HEXL and extended it to cover information about health facilities and their status and the number of beds and so on. So the fact that we can have sort of spontaneous uptake of a very sort of new alpha standard is quite encouraging to me. It says something about the simplicity of it and the ease with which people can adopt it.
Thank you. I think to respect the fact you have to walk about 5 minutes to get to the standing committee session, I'll bring this side event formally to a close. I'd like to thank the panelists for making themselves available and sharing their expertise with you. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming at 9 a.m. and being with us for the session. If you have any other questions, the team is here. You know who they are. Please, we'll stay around for a few moments. Please come up. But once again, thank you for coming.